Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Obama administration's refusing to call for a new probe into the U.S. military's killing of 12 Iraqis despite the public release of video footage capturing the attack on tape. Earlier this week, the watchdog website WikiLeaks released a classified U.S. military video showing a U.S. helicopter gunship indiscriminately firing on Iraqi civilians in 2007. The victims included 2 employees of the Reuters news agency, photographer Namir Noor Eldin and driver Saeed Shmah. 2 children were also badly wounded. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs said he's unsure if President Obama even saw the tape.
I do not know whether the president has seen the video that was released on the internet. Obviously, it is very graphic in nature, and it's and extremely tragic. For details of the investigation that the Defense Department, the Pentagon did on that, around that incident, obviously I would point you over to the Department of Defense.
Do you think that this warrants some additional investigation?
I don't, in all honesty, know enough about what was done previous, which is why I would point you over to the Department of Defense.
Family members of the victims have urged the U.S. to launch a new investigation and bring the U.S. service members involved to trial. An initial military probe shortly after the killings cleared the attackers of any wrongdoing. The Pentagon, meanwhile, is claiming it can no longer find its copy of the video footage. Military officials say they're trying to track it down from the unit that investigated the attack. The video was never publicly released and only came to light after at least one source inside the military released it to WikiLeaks. You can go to our website, democracynow.org, for our interview with WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange, who oversaw the release of the footage. A federal appeals court has ruled the Federal Communications Commission lacks the authority to prevent Internet service providers from blocking and controlling Internet traffic. The FCC has long sought to force Internet service companies to give web users equal access to all websites, a concept known as network neutrality. But the decision grants the companies further control over Internet traffic while threatening the future of Internet regulation. The ruling is a major victory for cable giant Comcast, which had challenged the FCC's authority to impose network neutrality obligations on broadband providers. More on the story later in the broadcast. The Obama administration's formally unveiled its new policy on nuclear weapons that maintains the right to use nukes in launching attacks on other nations. Anti-nuclear activists and some Democratic lawmakers were hoping Obama would issue a blanket statement that the U.S. would never again be the first to use nuclear weapons. Announcing the policy in Washington, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the U.S. would only pledge to not use the weapons against non-nuclear states that comply with the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
We are enforcing our commitment to the NPT by stating clearly for the first time that the United States will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states that are party to the NPT and in compliance with their non-proliferation obligations.
The policy also maintains the U.S. can attack nations for violating the NPT. Defense Secretary Robert Gates singled out Iran and North Korea in asserting that all options are on the table.
There is a message for Iran and North Korea here. It is that if you're going to play by the rules, if you're going to join the international community, then we will undertake certain obligations to you. And then that's covered in the NPR. But if you're not going to play by the rules, if you're going to be a proliferator, then all options are on the table in terms of how we deal with you.
Critics say the new strategy doesn't go far enough in meeting President Obama's stated pledge to reduce nuclear proliferation. In a statement, Kevin Martin of Peace Action said, quote, "The new policy appears to be too beholden to outdated Cold War thinking, and it doesn't measure up to President Obama's vision of a nuclear-free world." 4 people remain missing in a West Virginia coal mine 2 days after the huge explosion that killed at least 25 miners. Rescue efforts have been suspended due to conditions underground at the Upper Big Branch mine. Massey Energy, which owns and operates the mine, says rescuers were forced to pull back from the search area because methane gas and smoke made it too hazardous to continue searching. Meanwhile, new revelations have come to light about repeated safety violations at the mine over the last several years. According to federal records, records. The U.S. Mine Safety and Health Administration cited the Upper Big Branch mine for more than 1,300 safety violations from 2005 through Monday. 50 citations came in the last month alone. We'll have more on the West Virginia mine disaster after headlines. In India, at least 76 government security forces were killed Tuesday in an attack by Maoist rebels. The ambush struck an Indian convoy as it returned to base in a central state. It was the deadliest attack on the Indian security services to date, and the latest in a conflict that's killed over 6,000 people in the last 7 years. The Indian government is vowing a harsh retaliation. You can go to our website at democracynow.org to hear our interview with the Indian writer Arundhati Roy, who walked with the Maoists in India. In Egypt, dozens of people were arrested on Tuesday for taking part in a pro-democracy rally in Cairo. Hundreds of Egyptian police officers scuffled with demonstrators calling for constitutional changes to ensure fairer elections. There were widespread reports of Egyptian forces beating protesters and seizing videotapes and cameras documenting the unrest. Egyptian opposition leader Ayman Noor criticized the police crackdown.
I think that some of you passed through Tahrir Square this morning and saw the outrageous display that harms Egypt's image. Thousands of plainclothes and uniformed officers and soldiers laying siege to Tahrir Square to prevent the right of tens of hundreds of citizens and youth from expressing their opinion on their right to demand constitutional change.
In Kyrgyzstan, at least 5 people have been killed in a government crackdown in a protest in the capital Bishkek earlier today. Thousands of demonstrators reportedly tried to seize a government building as part of a wave of protests calling for the resignation of the Kyrgyz president. There were reports of police firing live ammunition into the crowds. The Kyrgyz government has declared a nationwide state of emergency. The U.S. has backed the president since he took office 5 years ago. The Obama administration has been largely silent on alleged fraud and other abuses in Kyrgyzstan since the Kyrgyz government reversed the closure of a U.S. military base last year. The base has been vital to the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. The Obama administration suggesting it might cancel a scheduled visit from Afghan President Hamid Karzai next month. Over the past week, Karzai has criticized Western interference in Afghanistan and said the Taliban risks becoming a legitimate resistance movement. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs said the U.S. might evaluate Karzai's remarks to determine whether a White House visit is worthwhile. Meanwhile, a former top UN official in Afghanistan, Peter Galbraith, continued his war of words with Karzai by suggesting the Afghan president may have a drug problem. Galbraith made the comments in an interview with MSNBC.
He's prone to tirades. He can be very emotional, act impulsively. In fact, some of the palace insiders say that he has a certain fondness for some of Afghanistan's most profitable exports.
Well, wait a minute. So, if you're going to make that allegation, let's be explicit about it.
So you're saying he's got an issue, he's got his own substance abuse problem?
There are reports to that effect, but whatever the cause is, the reality is that he can be very emotional.
In a speech last week, Karzai singled out Galbraith and accused him of interfering in Afghan elections last year. Galbraith was fired last year from his UN position. He says he was let go for speaking out against widespread fraud in Karzai's re-election, but Galbraith's former superior said he was fired for conspiring to replace Karzai with a different Afghan leader. The Washington Post is reporting a top U.S. official has confirmed a Yemen-based Muslim cleric has become the first U.S. citizen added to a CIA list of targets for capture or killing. Anwar al-Awlaki is a U.S.-born cleric accused of having ties to the failed Christmas Day airline bombing and the shooting at Fort Hood. He was previously placed on a similar Joint Special Operations Command list for capture or killing. His addition to the CIA list means the White House gave its approval. In targeting Awlaki, the Obama administration has renewed a Bush-era policy granting U.S. forces authority to kill U.S. citizens abroad if they're linked to terrorist actions against the U.S. or U.S. interests. And the Native American leader Wilma Mankiller has died at the age of 64. Mankiller was the first woman to head the Cherokee Nation, the second largest nation in the United States. And this is the Democracy Now!, democracynow.org.